Hey gang, Private Jack here. Welcome to part 9 in my series on how to create a butterfly in Blender and get it back to Source Filmmaker and use it. Anyway, part 7 and 8, what happened there was I got so carried away in rigging the model and then doing the weights that I did it all in one shot. And basically I had to break the video down into two. So now that we're back on track, what we're going to do in this particular video is talk about location, rotation, scale, and how they're important and what you have to watch out for. So here we go. What I did is I actually, between videos, went out and recreated the butterfly and put it back into separate objects. Okay, and the reason why I did this was because I wanted to give you an aspect of how things can go astray when you're actually doing some modeling. So what I've got here is the butterfly. It looks all right. It's not too bad. It's looking really good. I mean, all the bones are working properly, and yeah, so the bones are working properly and it's not looking too bad. It's proportioned and it's looking, textures are looking really great. However, what happened here is while I was modeling, I was creating things in edit mode. I was rescaling them in object mode. I was moving them in object mode. I was moving them in edit mode. And I wasn't paying attention to where I was actually putting the actual object origin. Okay, so this little orange dot, if I move around the model, this wing is fine. It's the object origin is in the center. This one, same thing. This one, oh, the object origin point is way out here. Click on the body. Origin point's there. Click on the head. Oh, the origin point's here in the head. Click on the antenna. Got to get out of pose mode here. Click on the antenna, and I find the origin point way the heck out here. This wing, the origin point's here. Also, if you look over here in the Transform Tools menu, what you're going to find is that my scales and rotations and locations and everything else are totally out to lunch. They're not scaled 1 to 1 to 1. Locations and rotations are not 0, 0, 0, and that kind of thing. So this can really play havoc when it comes time to actually export the model and get it into Source Filmmaker. Okay, so this one is rotated. Its location is good. Its rotation is out to lunch. And if I click on the actual armature, I find that the armature is scaled at 1, but this is scaled at 1, and this one is scaled at 0.409, and this one is scaled at 0.511. So the scales and everything are out to lunch. The locations, rotations, and that kind of thing are out to lunch. And if I was to export this and try to put it together and throw it into Source Filmmaker, well, it could wreak havoc, and the model would not deform properly. The armature might be a different size from the actual model. Blender Source Tools will try to put things together properly for you, but it might not work. The best thing you can do is actually get this thing into a 1 to 1 to 1 and 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0 type relationship with the armature. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how you would go about doing that. Now this is a pooched model and I've got it named Screwed, and we'll go back to the regular model because there's more we have to talk about in the way of scaling. Okay, anyway, to get this model into a situation where it will compile properly, what we have to do is we have to get all the origin points into one location. We have to get the scale and the locations, or the scale and the rotations all equal to one another in relation to the actual object. The way that we do this is by selecting the individual objects in the model. Okay, you see how the origin points are all over the map and whatnot else? Well, I'm going to clear off the selection here. I'm going to select the whole model by pressing A a couple of times until everything lights up, including the armature. And in object mode, I got to make sure that the armature is in object mode, because it won't work if it's in pose mode. So let's get a hold of that. Okay, so the armature is in object mode. I'm going to select the whole model like this. In object mode, I'm going to come down here to Object. I'm going to come here to Apply. And I'm going to click on Location. What this will do is it will take all the origin points for all the individual objects and place them in the center of the work area. Okay, so now all my objects, if I go around and I click on them, they're all located at 0, 0, 0. My rotations are still out, my scale is still out, that kind of thing. Don't worry about that right now. But my locations are all 0, 0, 0. Now for the scale, I'm going to do the same thing. Select all the objects, come down here to Object, Apply. And I can do it. I can do rotation and scale in one fall swoop, but I like to do them separately. I click on rotation, and now all my rotations should be 0. So this is where everything is going to be like in regards to the rotation. All the rotations are now 0, including the armature. So everything is in relation to one another. Now for scale, same thing applies. Select the whole object, go to Object, Apply, Scale. Now everything in this model should be scaled to 1. So everything is in relation to each other. See this? Everything is 0, 0, 0 and 1, 1, 1, 1. Okay, so there we go. This model is now put together properly and will actually form itself properly when we do a compile. Okay, I'm going to get rid of this particular object right now because when we actually went through and worked with the actual model, we had already pushed this thing all together. Okay, like it's all one object, right? And I can do it with this one as well if I wanted to, simply by selecting all the objects, making sure the body is the last object that I selected, and do a join. So this is now all one object again. But because I was playing with it, it's all screwed up and I'm not going to use this one. So we're going to close this one out. Okay, and we're going to open up our last save. So, Blender. Oh, I was using the Steam Blender, right? I forgot. Got to go back and get the Steam Blender. You got to want to make sure that you guys know that I'm using the Steam Blender. So we'll close that one out. Come back into Steam and open Blender. I'm going to do a file save, or a file open, and we're going to pick up that last one that we were working with. Here's my pooched one here. Okay, so here's the model we were working with in the last session. Okay, it's all one object, and if I look at the object, it is sitting at location 0000, rotations are 0, scale is 1. If I select the armature and make sure it's in object mode, I can see the same thing. Everything is 0 and scale is 1. So this thing is proportionally scaled, rotated, and located to itself. Okay, now, next thing. When working in Blender, we have a tendency of losing aspect to actual scale. And what I'm talking about now is that I want to use this particular butterfly in Source Filmmaker. I want to use it with one of the TF2 characters. Now, I have no idea what that scale relationship between the TF2 character and this butterfly is. I mean, this butterfly, if I export it and bring it into Source Filmmaker, could be the size of an atom. Or, on the other end of the spectrum, it could be a Mothra. So, what I need to do is I need to find out what the actual scale of this model is in relation to the character sets that I'm going to use it with. Now, one thing that I can do in Blender is I can actually import one of the TF2 characters, and then I can scale this model to work with that particular model. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to select the entire model and we're going to move it to another layer. So I select the model, pressing A couple of times, and I better turn on my screencast keys so you can see again. There we go. Screencast keys are back on. So I'm going to select the whole model, pressing A couple of times so that the whole model lights up. I'm going to press M to move it, and I'm going to move it to the third layer. Disappears from the first layer, and down here I can see that it have an object on the third layer, and there it is. I'm going to come back into the first layer. I'm going to center my cursor, Shift S, cursor to center, so that when I spawn my TF2 character, it's going to spawn in the center of the work area. Now, how do I get a TF2 character? Well, there's one of two ways. You can either decompile one of the TF2 characters using Crowbar into SMD format and import that into Blender, or the other option is if you have downloaded the SDK, the Source SDK, it usually comes down with a second folder that's called Source SDK Content. And in that folder, you're going to find reference models for a few of the different games that Valve has created. In the case of TF2, what they did is they included the QC files, the animations, and the class models as references. Now I'm going to bring in the heavy because I'm going to use this butterfly with the heavy, and I want to make sure that it is really proportionate to the heavy. So I'm going to go File, Import, and I'm going to come down here to Source Engine, and with the Source Engine we can import SMDs, VTAs, DMX files, and QCs. So if I wanted to actually compile the entire heavy, I could actually load up the QC scripts that I'm about to show you. Okay, so I'm going to click on that, and to find this folder, what you do is you go into C, Program Files, x86, this is where it usually installs, Steam, Steam Apps, Common. Here are all the SDK files. I've downloaded the tool sets, and right here is the Source SDK content folder. I'm going to click on that. Now here are the various games that they provide a few references for. The one that I'm going to select is TF. And here I've got map sources, I've got model sources, MVM. If I go in there, there's nothing there that I can use in Blender, and particles. Here in the model source folder, I drill into that, I find a player folder, drill into that, and here are the 9 classes. If I drill into the one that I want the heavy, I'm going to find scripts, parts, and animation. In the scripts, this is where the QC files live. If I wanted to compile the game HWM model, okay, I would select heavy high QC. And as soon as I click on import, it would piece together all the reference materials, all the animations, and bring it into Blender for me. If I wanted to compile the player model, I would use the heavy low. Okay, now you have to remember these are the game HWM and player model, not the TF Movies HWM model. Okay, so I don't want to go to that extreme. I just need a reference model that I can use to compare the scales. So I'm going to back out of this one and go into parts. Now here in parts they give you 3 options. You can import an SMD. If you're using Maya, they have an actual Maya folder that has the .ma files in it for the heavy. Or you can import a DMX. I'm going to import a DMX. I'm going to go into DMX and I'm going to find that in here I've got all the LOD files. I've got the high morph and the low morph. The high morph is the game HWM reference. The low morph is the game player model. But if I bring in these 2 files, I'll find that it's missing the hands because the hands is a body group on itself. I just want to bring in the reference model of the heavy, so I'm just going to select heavy morphs high. I'm going to bring in the game HWM model. Click on import, whirls around, and nothing happened. I get errors all over the place. What happened? Well, what happened was when I did the import, I didn't look at the preferences for importing the DMX. So down here, what it ended up trying to do was append the heavy mesh to the butterfly armature, and that doesn't work because the armatures aren't named the same, don't have the same number of bones or anything else like that. What I had to do is I had to change this to make its own armature, make a new armature, and when they compile or when they put this model together, they probably build it in Maya because the up axis is actually Y. I want this to stand on the floor upright, so what I have to do is I have to change my up axis to Y. Now I'm going to select that heavy morph, or that heavy morph model, and import it. Whirls around, thinks about it a little bit, and then poof, here's my heavy. Like I said, the hands are a separate body group. Now, I've got the heavy on layer 1, I've got my butterfly on layer 3. How the heck do I determine whether or not this butterfly is an atom or a Mothra or is not too bad off? Well, what I do is I select the layer 3, hold down the shift key and select layer 1, and now they're in the same scene together. And looking at this particular butterfly, it doesn't seem too bad. It looks pretty good. I think we've got a good scale here. But let's say I did want that Mothra model, okay? What I would do is I would click layer 1 and deselect everything on the heavy. Hold down the shift, bring in layer 3 again. If this is all selected, all fine and good. If not, I can go to layer 3, press A couple of times, come back into layer 1, and now my butterfly is selected. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just scale this thing so it's Mothra. I want the heavy to be able to ride on Mothra. So I'm going to hit the S button to scale, and I'm just going to pull the butterfly back until he's gigantic. Probably about like that. If I'm happy with that scale, what I can do now is I can click on layer 1, select the heavy a couple of times, press X, and delete them. I'm done with them. I don't need them anymore. I've got the scale of my model that I'm going to use. Now, if I've scaled the model in object mode, and I come back up here in my transform menu and make sure that my everything is in object mode, I am going to find that my scale is now out of whack. What I would have to do is go through to Object, Apply, Scale. And that will change the scale back to 1 by 1 by 1. And when I export this thing, it will stay huge, large like this, and I will have a Mothra model when I finish my compile. But I don't want this. I want my model to be that original size. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to change everything back to 1. I want it to be a small little butterfly, scaled to work with the TF2 element. Okay, so now I've got everything done. I'm going to, because I've played with the scale, I'm going to apply the scale. I'm going to apply location, I'm going to apply rotation, and I'm going to apply scale, just to make sure everything is hunky-dory and ready to go. Okay. Now that that is done, if I do export this model right now, this model, when it's compiled, will spawn in Source FilmMaker. And if I default the model, what is going to happen with this model is it is going to fall halfway through the floor. And the reason for that is that my origin point is here in the middle of the actual model. Okay? The origin point is going to form the root transform bone of the model in Source FilmMaker. So, I want my model to spawn above the floor. I want to allow enough room to have a flapping animation that the wings will not clip down through the floor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the entire model, and I'm going to pull it up off the floor, maybe 2.5 blender units. Right about there. Okay, so here I can see on the Z, I have moved the location of the origin point up to 2.49277. I'm just going to round that off to 2.5. There we go. Now I want to make sure that the model and everything is correct. Selecting the model. Where's the origin point for the actual model? We're not really sure. There's the origin point. 1. There's the origin point for the model. It's hidden in behind the bone there. Let's go into this mode, and there's my origin point right there. Select the armature, and there's my origin point in the same place. So everything is still in the same place, which is good. However, if I do export the model now, what is going to happen is that origin point is still in the middle of the model. It's going to form the root transform, and if I default the model, it is going to fall back down halfway through the floor. So how do I fix this? I want the model to spawn, and when I default it, I want it to sit above the floor, 2.5 blender units above the floor. Well, what I have to do is I have to apply the location again. And when I apply the location for the entire model, make sure the entire model is selected. When I apply the location, oh, look at this. No, we're good. Okay, when I apply the location for the entire model, what's going to happen is the origin points for the armature and the mesh are going to fall back down to the center point on the floor. Okay, so let's do that. Object, apply, location, and there's the origin points on the floor. So now what will happen is when I spawn this model in Source FilmMaker and I default it, the actual default will be on the floor. The root transform point will float to the floor, and it will have the bones will have that offset, leaving it up above the floor by 2.5 blender units. Okay, so that's how we fix up locations, rotations, and scale. So just to make sure everything is ready and hunky-dory and ready to go, I'm going to apply location, I'm going to apply rotation, and I'm going to apply scale. Everything in this model should now be 0, 0, 0, 0, and 1 to 1 to 1. See this -0? Well, what might have happened is I've lost connectivity of the model with my armature, so I'm just going to reselect the armature, and again, make sure everything is selected. Object, apply, location, object, apply, rotation, object, apply, scale. There. Now we've got everything sitting 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. And scale is 1. Okay, so that's got that done, and I think I'm finished with this particular video. A lot of information, and the big thing is always remember, the origin point is going to form your root transform bone in Source FilmMaker. This is the bone that is going to sit on the floor when you default the model. Now you may end up with a weird rotation because of the way that Blender and SFM talk to one another, but the rotation will be on the Z axis and just spin it around the wrong way or something like that. It's minimal, and I don't even worry about it. As long as I have my rotations, locations, and scale set to 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, and 1, I'm happy. So with that, I'm going to leave that with you, and in the next video we're going to do some animations and give this guy a flapping animation that we can include with that will be included with the export and compile into Source FilmMaker. So stand by for the next video, and see you soon. Private Jack out.